I wanted to touch on this topic of executive presence because, I know you train, you teach leaders in terms of executive presence. You yourself have been an executive leader. What's your favorite definition of executive presence? It's often a word we've seen, heard, but it's so hard to understand for so many.
Yeah. Well, I think executive presence is a combination. It's actually a combination of actions, behaviors, in the way you're carrying yourself that drives results, that gets results faster. It's a combination of things. I don't think there's only one thing that executive presence is. But I will tell you what's really important about executive presence. It starts first and foremost as an inside job. So many people come to me and say, I want to improve executive presence, so please tell me how to stand, tell me how to present, tell me how to move my mouth and sit. And I'm always saying that's not executive presence. Executive presence, the secret sauce is confidence. It starts on the inside. Right. So looking at the inside first about how do you feel? A lot of people say, oh, I don't have as much executive presence presenting to senior leaders, or I don't have as much executive presence presenting to large groups versus small groups, for example. And so then we just look on the inside. What's driving that? What's the difference between a one-on-one and presenting to 50, 100, 5,000? And when you can start to kind of peel back the layers of the way we're looking at that helps so much. Right. And then they start to realize that once they can conquer the inside, the outside just becomes, moving. You just kind of moving things around on the boat. It's not what it's all about.
That's it. Yeah, the thoughts, the beliefs, the limiting beliefs, as we call them. That's really driving.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same for men and women, by the way. A lot of people say, oh, women have issues with executive presence. Well, I hear you. I can see that some women do, but let me tell you, most of the people who come to me are men. So we shouldn't underestimate, the importance of that for everybody.
And for yourself, Brenda, were you always confident, or is this something you've had to work on yourself?
I don't think there's a human on the face of the planet that hasn't questioned themselves once in a while, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Because when you question yourself, what happens is you kind of surface what you don't want. And I think what you don't want defines what you do want. That juxtaposition, that contrast is, I think, what teaches us in life where we want to go next, right? I didn't like that experience, so I'm going to experience it's different than that. Yeah. And it's really what helps us move forward. I think if life was always wonderful and we're always happy and we're always full of confidence, first of all, it'd be boring. It's that contrast that makes life kind of interesting. But I think we also wouldn't evolve as humans. I don't think we'd evolve as leaders unless we faced with those challenges. Challenges are what help us grow. Absolutely. So I always welcome them. Am I always confident about them? No, but that's kind of the fun part of it, right? You get to choose what you're going to do and how you're going to inform the outcomes.
And I wanted to ask you this about, going back to executive presence and women in the leadership space, in the corporate space. How do they navigate that fine balance we often hear of being able to command, of being able to lead and still not getting labeled negatively?
I'll never forget when I left the corporate world. I'll never forget my very last day of leaving the corporate world. I was vice president of a $2 billion business and in line to become the president, and I was leaving. I decided to start my own business, and I'll never forget one of my fellow vice presidents who we'd always had a little bit of a contentious relationship. He liked to challenge me. He walked into my office and he sat down in front of me. He said, I'm sorry to see you go. He said, you're the best female leader I've ever worked with. And I thought, why did you have to put the word female in front of it, right? And it was interesting. My first reaction was that. My second reaction was, he sees me through that lens first and foremost, right? We have these filters. That's what we do. As humans, we have these filters. There's 4 things we subconsciously notice about someone else, whether we like it or not. And it's been this way since caveman days. One of them is gender, right? And it's one of the things we look at immediately. And so I didn't blame him for it. I thought it just gave me interesting perspective. But the truth is, I always aim to be the best leader I could be. whether I was female, whether I was male, whether I was purple, white, yellow, whatever, did not matter. I was going to try to be the best leader I could be. And that was the mindset that I owned. And I think that's really important. You know, people are going to see you as they see you. You're going to be the person with dark hair. You're going to be the person with blue eyes. You're going to be there's not much we can do about that. But what we can do is on the inside, recognize that we are going to be the best we can be in what we're doing, whether female, male, tall, short, with a beard, without a beard. That doesn't matter as much as what we're doing.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a lot of that are our own biases, right? There are our own set of lenses.
We do, and they're unconscious, and we don't even know we're doing them. And so I can't blame others for it. It's the way we're hardwired, and we're hardwired that way to protect ourselves. It's a safety mechanism, so we can't get angry about it, but we can look at it with objective curiosity again, and just say, how is that serving me? Is it really true? Is that a belief that's holding me back? You know, do that inner work. Again, do the inner work.
And for our audience, Brenda, would you be able to share the other three? You know, you mentioned the one gender. What are the other three implicit things?
Okay, so gender, age, some form of ethnicity, like some skin color, whatever, and then some form of physical height or disability. Those are the four things that we subconsciously and immediately notice about someone else. How we know that? This is an interesting story. They did research many years ago, and what they did was they would have they recruited people to come in for research. They said, you're going to come in to be doing research, and so these people would show up. Now they're being filmed, but they don't know that. So they show up in there, and they go up to. They said they walk in the door, and someone would say someone was standing behind a counter, and there was a counter, and a white man was standing behind a counter dressed in a tie and a suit, and he would say, please fill this form out. So the person grabs and starts to fill out the form, and behind the counter, the man says, I'm going to jump down and get your name tag. The man would drop down, and whoever stood up next, there was someone else down there. So if another white male stood up, even if it had different hair color, different colored tie, they never noticed the difference. So they would fill out the form, they'd get the hand, they'd go into another room. They would sit down with the researcher, and the researcher would say, you actually met two people during that interview, that beginning process. Did you recognize that? And they would say, no, it was only one person. And that was because it was the same male. The only time they would notice is if it was a different gender, as if it was a different age, a different ethnicity, and like I said, some form of physical or a height disability, that type of thing.
Right. So interesting. That's all psychology at work, right?
It really is. At work, literally, yeah.
And, you know, I don't know if you've seen this, but often you get a lot of leaders who may be at, you know, high-level positions, senior positions, but they're younger in age. And that sometimes becomes a barrier for them internally. You know, they always view themselves as, you know, people are looking at them as maybe not as qualified just because of their age. Have you seen that?
Yeah, well, two things. Number one, imposter syndrome, right? We think that we're a fraud. Are people going to find out that I really don't know what I'm doing, right? That's one. The other is, and whenever I coach someone who's gotten into a job, I remember I coached a 32-year-old CEO, 7,500 people in his organization. He's 32 years old, and his predecessor had been like 56, right? So it was a really big deal. And there were times when he looked at me and he says, what am I doing? Have they made a mistake? And I looked at him and I said, do you think the company made a mistake? Really? And I'm going to tell you, they had all these people they could choose, and they chose you. Do you think that they made a mistake? Why do you think? What are all the reasons why they chose you? And by the time we would get done, it was a long list. Because actually they needed young blood, they needed young people, they needed people who could bring in new perspectives. And so when you can shift that perspective and reframe it, it changes everything. And he's gone on to be a wildly successful CEO, getting better and better and better, not just in that organization, he's gone up and within that organization and taken on much bigger roles.
It's an amazing story, and speaks to, it's all an internal dialogue, you know, as you said, it's the inside job. It's the inside job of leadership. It really is. And we just don't typically pay attention to it because we don't know how most of the time.